Okay, everybody. So listen, I've only got 20 minutes to go over this. I've crushed as much stuff as I possibly can into this thing. I'm going to move a little fast. I hope you'll forgive me. So we're going to start with the side. So basically, what I want to do is basically talk about 4 things I think are going to be the headlines this year that are going to ruin your day, or you're going to get questions about from your bosses. I think a lot of these things feel like surprises in the moment, but ultimately they are forecastable. We can see them coming. I'll start with an issue that is criminal. I think this is probably the one that's going to affect the most people. The ransomware problem has not gone away, right? There was this moment, I guess about a year ago, where people were like, hey, maybe things are getting better, and there were some good metrics. There was a dip, and some of us were optimistic, including myself, but the reality is this is an incredibly resilient ecosystem. And the reason it's so resilient is that these actors, your incident is often not one actor, right? That's a mistake a lot of people make. It's not a single actor or single group. It's usually a series of transactions between multiple actors. Sometimes somebody will get on your systems with a foothold, maybe through spam or some other operation. They'll sell that foothold to an intrusion operator. And that intrusion operator will spend all their time gaining access to your organization, and then they will go to a ransomware service and affiliate with them and deploy their ransomware, and then the ransomware service will do the negotiations with you. And that's where you usually hear those big names in ransomware. But the reality is like most of the intrusion work was done by a group that most people don't know, or you never hear the name of. And the initial intrusion came from an entirely separate operation. What this means is that this is an incredibly resilient ecosystem. The U.S. government's doing all kinds of really smart stuff. The global governments are doing a lot of really good stuff right now to put some friction into these operations, but they're not going away. Because tomorrow, if one of these operators go down, they go right into the marketplace and they just find somebody else to partner with. And most of them partner with multiple people already. Unfortunately, this problem isn't going to go away. So how did we get here? I don't know if you remember, cybercrime used to be really a retail banking problem, right? When I used to started selling cybercrime intelligence over a dozen years ago, that's the only people that really bought it. What changed is cryptocurrency basically changed the way that people could monetize access, right? Before it was, I need to steal data so I can enable fraud. Now it is, I have a way to easily monetize this problem. So how do I turn the screws on you until you pay me? When we first started seeing this problem, it was onesie twosie. You would see like a single person on a single computer that got hit with ransomware. Somebody realized it pays a lot better to actually hit entire enterprises simultaneously. And because this is a marketplace, the criminals all moved in that direction. And then somebody realized, hey, listen, ransomware is okay, but some of these people aren't paying, right? So we got to find another way to turn the screws. And how do you turn the screws even further? You start leaking people's documents. In fact, leaking people's documents, people are way more responsive to that than they actually were to the disruptions from ransomware. So it's been really successful. So now the game is, how can I hack you until you pay me? Really, what new innovative ways can I disrupt or extort you until you pay me? And we're going to constantly see new tactics developing out of this because they can monetize so easily through cryptocurrency. Another way to look at this is it takes really just 2 days to get ransomware on a system. So some of these operators will literally just do ransomware and they can get the job done in 2 days. But the other ones they'll spend 3 times as much time on a system to actually steal that data because that's so much more valuable to them, because they recognize that it's such a practical way to force people to pay. And so let's talk about the file transfer service problem. So a lot of us use file transfer services or file transfer applications. They have become easy prey for criminals with 0 days. Back when I first started doing this, 0 days were really an espionage problem. You didn't really have to worry about them. The average organization didn't have to worry about 0 days. They were really used by spies against spy-type targets. And suddenly you're seeing these 0 days against a lot of organizations simultaneously because they're hitting these file transfer services. So think about it. I could take 6 days to hit one organization and then steal that data that I can use to extort you, or pay for a 0-day, which is an upfront cost, maybe like 200 grand even, and then hit a ton of organizations with a 0-day simultaneously. Fin11, the actor behind the Accellion stuff and a lot of other recent file transfer service 0-days, they have had so much success with this, they don't have enough time to extort everybody, right? They have a backlog of extortion. It takes too much time. It's too much energy, right? They are literally standing on a mountain of stolen data. What are you going to see? Even if Fin11 has retired, because they've probably made over $100 million in this. This is how much they've made. Even if they've retired, because this is a marketplace, the other actors see this and they're going to move in that direction. So expect more of this. Do not use your file transfer services and your file transfer appliances as storage. They are for temporary transit of data. Make sure that when these guys do this, that you don't have anything sitting on that thing, right? Or whatever's sitting on there is very minimal. Configuring that will probably save you from that problem. North Korea, I've tracked them for a million years, mostly focused on espionage for a long time. Suddenly we start seeing them knocking over banks. So much of their activity now has turned from a focus on espionage, and they still do espionage, to just good old-fashioned crime. Task their hackers and these assets with basically funding the state. And that's actually have a far greater scope than you might expect. One of the ways that it's having a big scope is they're literally doing IT outsourcing. So there are people in North Korea who sit in an office building and take freelancer jobs, right? Some of those are legitimate jobs. These are animators. They were literally just doing animation work. They actually were doing animation work on very popular series that are on streaming networks that you would recognize. But they're all tied in to the intelligence services, right? And if they see an opportunity, and they've done this, when they see an opportunity to basically leverage that insider access for more money, they take it. The other way, though, the real way that they make a lot of their money is just going after Bitcoin wherever they can get it. They like to go after users. They like to go after Bitcoin services. But the big tactic that we see from them, the one that's really paying off, is the supply chain. They are doing big supply chain attacks through technology companies. They're trying to move downstream through patches and any other connections from those technology companies. And they're doing so much of it, in fact, we can literally see them stringing supply chains together. So they will literally come down from one supply chain, get a whole bunch of organizations at once. One of those organizations happens to be a SaaS company or a tech company or something along those lines, leverages that company's access to get to even more services. You will see, forecast 2, you will see another one of these incidents within the next year, and they will hit a lot of people. They'll probably be after Bitcoin, that's the good news, but they also hit users, and they'll also use tech companies to get down to other targets. 3, the cyber espionage problem. Not everybody's problem, right? A lot of these actors are generally focused on good old-fashioned espionage. This group on the right, the FSB, which is Russia's, allegedly their domestic intelligence service. They also do their signals intelligence role. Most of the stuff that we see from them is very focused in the sort of classic espionage space. Most people will never see FSB activity in their organization because they're generally going after defense industry, diplomats, and military. The GRU, we see a broader spray from them. The GRU has been responsible for most of the major cyber attacks you've heard. When I say cyber attacks, the disruptive, destructive attacks you've heard out of Russia. They've turned out the lights at least 3 times in Ukraine, including way before this war began. They attacked the Olympics. They tried to take the opening games of the Olympics down. They attacked they were behind the attack on the U.S. elections. They attacked the French elections. NotPetya, the most expensive cyber attack in history, which took down companies all over the world. You couldn't get Oreos to shelves. Global shipping came to a halt. Vaccine production stopped. That was them as well. They're carrying out a campaign of destruction and disruption. Most of it right now is focused in Ukraine, thank goodness, but these things slide out. I had a good friend I work with who called me and told me that one day that the gas stations that they work with in Poland were offline. And the reason they were offline is a Ukraine-focused attack didn't really abide by the borders, right? And that's just an important thing to remember about in the cyber realm. These things don't necessarily abide by borders, right? Conflicts are messy. Organizations stretch across borders. That's why NotPetya hits so many organizations. These things can reach out and touch people all over the world at any time. But the actor I really want to focus on here is the SVR. The SVR is the Foreign Intelligence Service. We really see two types of activity. One is spear phishing. Mostly they're targeting diplomats. It's actually pretty standard and not that different from some of the stuff that we see from FSB. But there's another side to their activity that has been in the news quite frequently, been in the news a couple of times. These are the guys that were behind the SolarWinds incident, right? The SolarWinds incident was essentially a supply chain, an incredible supply chain opportunity, right? They got into thousands of organizations as a result of a single supply chain incident. These are the guys behind an incident that's also been in the news involving a major technology firm. Actually, involving several technology firms. Not all of them have been directly attributed to them. But they are basically playing this game where they are moving through these big tech firms and even the small tech firms. I'm talking all the way from hyperscalers to resellers to get down to their clients. Right? And this is the kind of situation that gets really messy really fast, like SolarWinds, where almost anybody can end up incidentally in the middle of an incident involving these guys. So this is another actor that we're keeping a really close eye on moving forward. All right. I'm really squeezing this all in. I can't believe this. So the last actor, or the problem, prediction I have for you guys is 0 days from the People's Republic of China. When I started doing this a long time ago in the government, these actors would basically come from literally right downtown, like Shanghai, right? They would come out of a net block right next to where their office was. You knew who they were, and they would use spear phishing tactics that were actually pretty easy to catch. In a lot of cases, we first find these things because the user saw it and said, this looks illegitimate, and they would flag it for us, right? That was 15 years ago. These guys have put a lot of resources and a lot of time and effort into improving their operations. They are not the same operations anymore. For one, they started out maybe coming out of home range, then they moved to VPSs and VPNs. Now they've got a really complex type of infrastructure that they're using. So now what they're doing is they're moving through SOHO routers, right? So your small office, home office routers, they're leveraging well-known vulnerabilities in these things and building up botnets of compromised routers. And they're leveraging that as infrastructure for their operations. What that means is instead of coming from home range or coming from a known VPS or VPN, they can come from what looks like somebody's house right down the street, right? The other thing that's really great about that for them is whenever they want, they can just switch to a new IP address, right? And they can constantly change things up. And for me, that's a nightmare, right? It makes it much, much harder for us to track these actors and even attribute them and connect their activity, right? It really confuses matters on our end. The other thing that we see more and more from these actors is that they are targeting the network edge, right? So I talked about a lot of their peers are still very focused on social engineering. These guys are less interested in that now. Instead of going through the social engineering pathway, they're way more interested in the network edge. And the area in particular they're interested in the network edge is the security appliances. These guys have recognized that security appliances offer really two major advantages, maybe even three major advantages. One, you don't have to send that email that users recognize as bad or whatever and flag their operations. Two, it's an area that is ideally placed or with access to the rest of your network a lot of times. And three, they are systems that oftentimes you don't have endpoint protection on. And we have seen them repeatedly target these systems with 0 days. In fact, we've seen so many of them, this is like beyond trends or whatever, they're going to do this again. I will bet you we're going to have about another dozen 0 days in security appliances this year. This will start out, by the way, used by these actors, but they won't necessarily, that won't be where it ends. Remember, 0 days are a proliferation problem. This might start out as an espionage problem, and you might say, I don't have espionage problems, right? This is not what my business is involved in. But who's going to use this 0 day after them? So consider that. Consider where this, even if this isn't necessarily, you at the beginning when they're super quiet, it might be you in the after that, right? We are going to see a lot of 0 days in security appliances because they have had so much success. If you ask me, this is John's personal opinion. I don't have like a satellite photo to prove this or anything like that. I believe they have a laboratory somewhere or multiple of them, and a bunch of people are essentially breaking these appliances all day long and building out these 0 days, right? We've been for 2 years. They have been piling on this space, and they've had a lot of success. In fact, 1 0 day we saw hundreds of victims. 8 months they were able to hit them. 8 months under the radar, hitting hundreds of victims. Whatever that costs, and usually 0 days cost like on edge appliances, they're in the hundreds of thousands. But if you can get hundreds of victims, that's super efficient. It's a great deal for them. So just expect more of that. So that's forecast 4. All right. I think I have 1 minute. Can I take 8 question? 1 question? Shout it out. Yes, sir.
Try to phrase this as succinctly as possible. How do you see these vulnerabilities and exploitations, especially from North Korea, Russia, and China, as a threat to our nation's critical infrastructure?
Oh, I didn't talk about this, but there is definitely they're using 0 days against our nation's critical infrastructure currently. The other sort of secret sauce, they're doing the same things I talked about. The other thing that we're seeing with that campaign that's making them very effective is they're also living off the land. There's no IOCs because they're coming out of SOHO networks, right? SOHO modems. That means like all of our IPs and domain intelligence, that we don't have the value of that. And they're not deploying malware. So we're living in a world without IOCs, right? The artifacts that we depend on to hunt these guys, to group them, to understand them, are dissipating, right? It's hard for them to operate that way. It's very expensive, but it's really hard to find them that way. It takes a lot of work. Yes, sir. Yes, they end up all over the place, and we're actually seeing a series of activity that's actually coming out of places like the United States and UK. They're very social engineering focused, and they're very aggressive, but most of the activity is still out of Russia. And that is why, by the way, they operate so freely. They have nothing to fear. This is not going to go away. We're not in a position to negotiate with Russia right now to go arrest these people. They're just not going to do it. Thank you guys for having me.